Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast, driving up the 80, as we've been doing a few episodes where we're driving on highways, but now we're doing it remotely where I'm driving up the 80 and my dad is in Santa Fe. And we're going to have a conversation about a lot of things, but today we'll talk about, but before I start, we'll go the intro of what this show is about, which is about we're investigating the rise of the PC industry, the internet, and the mobile phone and how it relates into AI and space. And there's an offshoot that a lot of people probably aren't very aware of, but it's related to the media aspect, which of course you are very familiar with, which is psychedelics. And psychedelics are related to media because it changes our brain. And media is well, actually, I should ask you this: what is media? That
So, media is essentially all forms of communication, mass communication. But right now we're communicating one-to-one, but we're sharing it with whoever wants to listen to it. That makes this inherently media.
yeah,
And it's usually referred to as media and entertainment, because entertainment is somewhat different than just communicating with people or informing people.
So this somebody said something about this in terms of media, entertainment, journalism, research. Yeah, they called Neil deGrasse Tyson an entertainer, not a scientist, because he's now got into the field of entertainment because he goes on a lot of public appearances. What do you think about that?
That's true, right? If he entertains audiences independent of their inherent interest in the science, then he is an entertainer.
Yeah,
You could be an entertainer with any kind of background. You know, some people say that Ronald Reagan was a good president just because he could communicate well, having been an actor and governor. And
and he was an entertainer too.
he was an entertainer, so he used that to his advantage as a politician to entertain people. And, so it's a thin membrane between any profession and being an entertainer. But, magic acts are entertainment. You could be entertained in a lot of different ways. In fact, that's why I'm so focused on it right now, because it's undergoing intense change right now with
Yes.
both streaming and immersive entertainment. But
Uh,
so media is anything where you're trying to inform other people, and entertainment is this offshoot of that, where you're also entertaining them.
so you can be both.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Now, psychedelics. How did that play a role in your career?
Absolutely. I know it's a leading question because that's the point. Yeah. So I went to school in college between 71 and 75. And at the time, all drugs were illegal. In fact, there was still a little bit of, tinge to marijuana being illegal. It was illegal, but, most of people who smoked marijuana went, why is this illegal? It's
Yeah.
better than alcohol. And, but there was a lot of experimentation going on. And this is sort of post the Timothy Leary era, where he became very publicly associated with trying LSD. By the way, I still remember what that stands for, which is lysergic dimethylide. And it's the chemical composition of LSD. And so he did a lot of LSD. People think that kind of affected him.
Yeah.
But I did a lot of LSD and mescaline, both
Interesting.
natural and synthetic, and other stuff, because it was unregulated, i.e. illegal. You didn't really actually know what you were taking. You'd had to trust your supplier. And I'm sure that I took LSD when I had bought mescaline, but I also experimented with cocaine. I never went over the line to heroin or the addictive stuff. But
Yeah.
so I attribute my career. Now, I stopped doing that when I think the last time I took any kind of psychedelic was when I was 22, maybe 23. So it's been 50 years since I've done that, and I have not taken any psychedelics since then or experimented with all the new stuff that's coming along.
Yeah.
I attribute having taken LSD and tripping with giving me an ability to see things differently, and
Yeah.
that has been an attribute of my career. that I can look at a certain set of facts or a situation, and I can imagine what it is and what it means without being restrained by my situation. So I can pull myself out and look at stuff like I'm tripping, but without taking psychedelics. Kind of like that. And
Yeah,
that's
and
allowed me to take positions. And as you know, I believe I've had a career of pissing people off, that I can take positions that are independent of what other people think and
yeah, it's
my own conclusions. So I believe it's part and parcel to the success I've had in my career.
yeah, it's something about hyper individuation, in my opinion. That these, so I think we talked about neurodivergence on some previous
Yep.
ones, and
Yep.
and how
Yep.
and so what I think psychedelics do is allow you to become more divergent, but they can allow you to become too divergent as well.
Oh yeah. And I saw that. I
Yeah,
saw it twice. I took friends of mine to the hospital because they
yeah,
flipped out while they were tripping. They couldn't
yeah.
handle the change in their condition, and they couldn't go forward with it. So they had to end up in a mental hospital. So I
Did
did
you
see
ever check in with them? Did you ever check
that.
in with them like 10, 20 years later about what happened?
Not really.
No.
Uh, so, but I had that experience. I mean, I was with them tripping, and yet I was able to maintain enough
Yeah,
to
yeah,
to the hospital
yeah,
and get them admitted.
yeah.
So I could still maintain my sense of reality while I was tripping, and it was just a difference. Some people didn't enjoy tripping. Some
Yeah.
people flipped out. So I had that experience in an environment where I managed to get through it and stop, and then use that experience in the rest of my life. And so,
Yeah.
I'm involved in Meow Wolf, and part of the
Yeah.
pitch on Meow Wolf
Yeah.
is that you go into one of Meow Wolf's exhibits, and it changes you. It gives you an experience that modifies the way you think about things. And I believe that's true, and it's why I was able to recognize why Meow Wolf would be successful before they built their first exhibit. Um, and ended up being an investor in the company. Um, so, uh, this is kind of why people are so interested in psychedelics now. And it's not just psychedelics, but mind-altering substances.
Yeah.
Um, and chemistry is kind of caught up. So
Yeah.
now you have MDA, and you have, you've talked about it, Iboga, and I've heard about ayahuasca. And so there's this whole range of chemistries that can produce remarkable experiences for people, way beyond what LSD did.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because this wraps up into media as well, where well, yeah, I'll give it a specific example. On Twitter, there's something called the Discourse, and the Discourse is where somebody will randomly tweet something and it'll go viral and all of a sudden start a conversation, and that conversation will the level of conversation will vary quite greatly, so back in 2017, 2018, people were talking about psychedelics in this great way that it'll help us all, lead us to utopia and everything like that. Now it's anti-psychedelic, at least among the more conservative branches that are more popular now on Twitter than they used to be, and they're talking about how the popularization of ayahuasca and how it is leading a bunch of people who have no business taking psychedelics, because I think it's pretty clear that psychedelics are not for everyone. They should
Yeah.
not, but they are becoming a mainstream thing. So I think a lot of people did what your friends did, ended up in situations that, maybe in the long term might be helpful for them in the same way that it was helpful for you, but also a lot of stuff that brings up a
It
lot of
could be
stuff.
damaged. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So it is. I mean, there is a sense that at some point we'll find a drug that will be great for everybody. Um,
the
but
soma.
the thing I'm always reminded of when people start talking about utopia or stuff like that is one of the opening scenes in the movie. Oh God, I can't believe I'm forgetting this because I've gone and clipped it.
Is it
Um,
Brazil?
no, the iRobot, that not iRobot,
Oh,
the robot movie that Pixar did. Um,
oh.
the E, it's E something. Um,
Dolly,
eh,
Dolly.
Dolly,
Yeah. Mm.
which is ironic because the imaging thing is also called Dolly. Um, but there's an opening scene. It's not the opening scene, but it's like a couple of scenes in where the humans are all in are blobs that are being carried around in containers and being fed food and uh, you know entertainment by
Yeah.
TV in their little pod, and it's just an incredibly dystopian view of the future, which is amazing that it came out of Pixar in a kids movie. Most people think of Delhi as a kids movie. It's a
Yeah.
little bit like Bambi, from Disney, where Bambi's mother is killed by hunters in the first 10 minutes. Um, you know, uh, Comedy and animation is a potential way of looking at the future. But anyway, a little off topic there, but you know, why don't they just feed these blobs? I mean, why do we exist unless
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
to do about it? Yeah. So it
Well,
is the utopian view of AI.
and there's this book by Aldous Huxley called Brave New World, which was a very, very influential book for me when I was growing up. And in that book, it takes the counterposition to 1984, which says that 1984 was all about totalitarian government using technology to control the people. And Brave New World was like, what if we don't need to control the people? What if we just make them happy? In a sense, control them, but more from this, like soma. So they had soma, which allowed people not to feel any pain, not to feel any and just feel pleasure all the time.
Yeah.
And it's super interesting because soma is a word from, I believe, from the Hindu scriptures, which is this the godly substance that makes all your pain go away, which the Greeks also talked about as well. And so it's very interesting. How do you think? Well, no, this was in the 1970s when you were doing this.
Yeah. 19. I started doing drugs when I was in high school, so I
Yeah.
went to, so sort of 69 to 75.
Yeah, okay. So this is a really important piece for me because I was under the impression that 1962 to 1968 was when the first mainstream psychedelics things and then kind of blipped out of existence after that. But you're saying that it went on.
Oh, yeah. So the 60s were flower power, the Vietnam War, um, but not a lot of people were taking drugs. There was marijuana, and but it was little pockets of
Yeah.
mescaline.
Hipsters. Yeah. It
Yeah.
was
But
all hipsters.
that's where the chemistry started. That's
Yeah.
Timothy Leary. It's not that he was a chemist, but he was fascinated by the ability to modify sort of human beings using chemistry. And that was what he was really into. Um, so, uh, so I really wasn't aware. I mean, the first time I started smoking marijuana, I was still in high school, and so that would have been in 68, 69. And
Yeah.
and then I saw other people taking drugs, and so I decided to experiment with it. I can't say I decided, but I started experimenting with it, and did my first trips in high school, and then I went to college, and like I could do anything I wanted, so I did quite a lot of it there.
Yeah. So it was early 20s, basically, early 20s. But
Yep.
then, by the time you started writing for what was it, Marine Publishing, were you completely out of it?
The first job I had was writing for a newspaper in Pasadena, so I was
Oh,
near
that's right.
college and I hadn't graduated yet.
Yeah.
And then I had a couple of jobs after that, but I graduated from school and I just stopped. I didn't take any more. What
Yeah.
what
Okay.
what I had in
Yeah.
my head was that this psychedelics really mess with you.
Yeah.
They fuck with you.
You
So
saw it.
I saw it, and I saw how it affected some people, and I was in an environment where I could do it without feeling threatened. But as soon as I started working and I
Yeah.
had a
Interesting.
salary and a professional career, like I didn't want to put that at risk. So I stopped. And
Well, this is
I
yeah.
didn't
This is
drink either. I didn't drink until I was in my 40s. So
what?
because I didn't like it.
Wait, that's new. I'd never heard that. Because my grandfather was drinking all the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was drinking wine every night, and he'd have a
Yeah.
one drink before dinner. Um, but that's not it's not your grandfather. Your grandmother was an
Yeah.
alcoholic,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so to some degree, because she was an alcoholic, my father never really drank. years ago.
Oh, interesting.
Drank
But
that.
Joe, great Uncle Joe, the columnist that was the shared the column with my grandfather. He drank a lot, right?
Well, yeah, I know, but he was never an alcoholic. There
Yeah.
is alcoholism. There's this phenomenon of some people become alcoholics with the same consumption of alcohol as other people who don't become alcoholics. So,
Yeah.
at least in my family, I don't think there's any history of alcoholism on my
Yeah.
father's side, your
Outside
grandfather.
of the
Yeah.
So and then once you got the job, those experiences went with you.
Yeah,
And then
they permanently changed my way of looking at the world. That's true. I know that.
yeah,
Um, so
because you can't not change your way. Like
yeah,
once there is a event that changes your chemistry, you can't go back from that event ever. Like in any event, like even when I'm
yeah,
about to go snowboarding, that this will affect my chemistry.
yeah. So there's this phrase that's used, which I recognize, which is I can't unsee that. Right.
Yeah,
Once
yeah,
you've seen something, you can't unsee it.
yeah.
And so I said, I mean, I have this distinct memory in my head. I went to school in Los Angeles and I'd go up into the mountains and take, some drug. And I remember sitting up in the mountains looking down at LA. And if you look down at LA when you're tripping, it looks like a living thing, right? The
Uh,
traffic moving, the lights, this is at night. So the lights are moving and blinking, and there's airplanes and helicopters flying around. And it's really an amazing scene when you're tripping, right? Because the lights turn into colors and a big, and it's a perfect place to trip because, anyway, I'm not sure it would be now, and I certainly not at my age, but at the time it was perfect because it gave me a metaphor, a visual metaphor for Los Angeles that I've always appreciated. I love LA. I've always loved LA. Just don't want to live there.
and this what we were saying about you can't unsee something leads me directly to the story of where I'll share where I got into all this stuff, which is about 10 or 15 years ago. I was reading on Reddit or the internet. I had actually discovered psychedelics, not in terms of actually taking them back when I was at boarding school in Utah. I became fascinated by that same thing that Timothy Leary was fascinated by, was that you can change your mind by doing these things. And I actually found the Anarchist Cookbook in like 1997, and an Anarchist Cookbook basically tells you all of the substances that nobody knows about, all the weird ones. And so I was like, well, wow, this is really interesting. But I was actually too scared to take anything. I did, of course, take marijuana and other things, but anything harder than that was like really just too much for me. I didn't want to lose control. And then I had done mushrooms a few times in my 20s. But it must have been around 27, 28 where I had smoking some weed, and I was like, my life is not in order. Like there's something wrong here. And
Right.
so it led me to start searching the internet, and I came upon iboga, the word iboga. And it turned in, and the first time I heard about it, and people were describing it just as this horrific 12-hour trip where it brings up everything you're avoiding in
Mm,
your life, and allows you to see it from a third party perspective and kind of move through it. And then once you're past the trip, you basically have a clean slate on your neuronal baggage. Like it gives you 8 months clear of
mm,
of of whatever you've been struggling with.
mm,
And so in that moment, I was like, I need to take that. And
mm.
also, I'm terrified of taking that. I will never
Yeah.
take that.
Because you,
Uh,
you may go somewhere you can't come back from. Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah, yeah. It's this intense fear, and then 2019, right before the pandemic, I was working with a counselor who helped me get my life in order, and we had been working for 2 years together, and he had never mentioned uh, any iboga or anything like that. And this our one of our final sessions, he's like, "Okay, now it's time for you to go do iboga." I was like, "What? What? How? Where did that come from?" Like I've been studying this thing for a long time, and I would have never have done it without some sort of third party saying like, okay, now it's time. And so he told me, and then I did it, and exactly what I was most afraid of happened, where it brought up all my fear, all my anxiety. It was a 12-hour panic attack, but by the end, I had a clear perspective, and I sometimes wonder whether I still have that clear perspective, whether it was a final change or whether I need to go back in and do it. But very interesting substance. But one of the things I learned from it also is that, like you, it's like Alan Watts said the perfect thing. He says, once you get the message, hang up the phone, in terms of psychedelics.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little bit there. I think Iboga has some more interest to me, but ayahuasca, I'm not too interested. A lot of people are interested in ayahuasca. 5-MeO DMT is basically the enlightenment experience, and in for an hour. And there's something there too as well that I'm a little bit interested in, but in general, it's like why be a tourist in that area, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, it's a judgment call because you could, lose touch with yourself and go
Yeah.
off to a place you don't want to be, which is
Yeah.
my fear and why I haven't done it for 50 years.
Yeah.
So, and I'm perfectly happy with that. Some people say to me who have never done it, well, I've read all about this and I think I want to do it. And I'm going like, the more structured your life is, the more rigid
Yes.
outlines are, the less you want to do it.
Yes.
Because it's going to mess with you. And
Unless you're in that the moment that I was in, the moment where I was just like, something's wrong. I need to. But my life has never been rigid, so
that's the point. Mine wasn't either.
yeah, yeah,
I was just kind of floating through, and
yeah,
so it's just another experience and
yeah.
one that was affecting for me. And
So
I wish I cannot possibly wish I had not done psychedelics because I attribute my
yeah,
fundamental success to having done them.
so cool. The one thing I want to ask you is that, so from this relates to our theme of our show, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s. Were psychedelics being used in the 1980s? Were other people that you were working with, talking with, were they using them? And then through each of those decades, were they an integral part of the tech community? Because I know that they were an integral part of the tech community from 2010 to 2020. I know that for a fact, that a lot of people, a lot of investors, a lot of Burning Man, of course. Burning Man is just like full of psychedelics. Everyone's on psychedelics there. So can you track the theme of it throughout those decades?
Yeah, not to mention microdosing
Yeah.
LSD.
Yeah.
Uh, the No, I mean, it was truly illegal. It's a class one drug, whether it's LSD or synthetic mescaline or whatever. All of these are illegal. There's a little bit of maybe MDA isn't illegal, but it's the FDA is paying attention to it. So
Yeah.
um, the there was too much social pressure for it to be common, and I mean, the people that experimented the way I experimented were still a very small subset of
Yeah.
population, if you will, of that age population. Most of my friends didn't do it in college, and I certainly didn't hear about it at all in the 80s, 90s, teens. The big deal was how marijuana started to become
Yeah.
legal.
Yeah.
Um, the So the recent interest in um, psychedelics and mind-altering substances is very recent. So it really is in the teen. I hear the British call them the naughties, right?
Nice. I like that. I like that. Steal that.
The naughties and the teens. It was in the teens that people started to pay attention because there was research done all along, and that research started to kind of filter out into the public consciousness. And there is a conclusion that you can use mind-altering drugs for therapy, right?
Yeah.
And that's been the bridge into, well, if it's good for therapy, then how do you make it possible to use it for therapy? And there are 3 states now, I think, that have passed laws that you can use. I believe it's synthetic mescaline, but
Yep.
I can't fully remember. It's Colorado and Oregon and Washington, I think, have made it possible to use um, mind-altering drugs for therapy, but it's still tightly controlled.
So did you ever want to get into it from an investment angle?
No, didn't want to touch it.
Why not?
Any more than like investing in marijuana. I mean, there's structural issues with
Yeah.
marijuana. It's controlled by the states, but um, and if the feds, Canada, federally legalized marijuana, so I don't really
Yeah.
know how it's gone there. I've heard mixed results, and it's gone better in some states than others, and there's still a notion that the feds maybe with this new administration, will authorize, will legalize marijuana at a federal level.
Well, that was a funny thing because I think Kamala Harris snuck it in there while in the last few months there, where she did run on legalizing it as well.
Yeah, at some level, but Trump has, Florida
Or-
had a plebiscite, whatever the hell you call it, a popular vote on legalizing marijuana, and it lost just barely. So there was a sense that if they legalized it in Florida, maybe Trump would make it legal. But it's a congressional thing, so you have to deal with all the nut jobs in Congress. So it's unclear if that'll ever happen. But if you go down a path and say, well, marijuana is legal and you can use it to recreate, maybe we go through the same process with other drugs that get declassified as class 1 drugs and can be. So Colorado, you can do that. You can do therapeutic activities with I can't remember what the drug is. I can
Probably MDMA or ketamine.
it might be ketamine, but I don't think so. I always heard it was what drugs are legal in Colorado. Gotta spell better. Are you driving, by the way?
No, I'm actually standing still. Just I parked near a snowbank before I go snowboarding.
Okay, good. Psilocybin. Psilocybin is
Yeah.
the
Okay. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the ingredient
Mushrooms.
in the mushrooms. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So mescaline is, but what recreational drugs are legal in Colorado? It includes ibogaine,
Whoa. Oh, that's right.
DPT, DMT, and psilocin, which I don't know what that is, but uh, that's a law firm. So, wow, go to town. I think it's still controlled, but that you can get them.
Yeah, so one of my body worker here in Nevada County, he is a osteopath, and he used to be able to prescribe anything that a doctor could because he is a doctor. But there's a sort of a war going on against osteopaths, and there has been since the 1920s. And so he actually is legally allowed to give ketamine sessions in California, which is really interesting. Ketamine is a very, it's not a psychedelic, it's a dissociative.
Right.
And Elon Musk has mentioned that he's done it as well for therapeutic reasons. And it's a very interesting one. Before we go down the rabbit hole of all the different types of one, I want to kind of double click on the Meow Wolf and Burning Man connection and psychedelics. I
Yeah.
had a really fun experience where with some of the team of Meow Wolf, I went up and I'm deathly afraid of LSD. So I've microdosed it before, but any larger doses I stay away from. And we went up to the mountains in Santa Fe, and we all took LSD. And so I
Don't
know
name any names, by the way, because
I'm not naming. Yeah, I'm not naming any names.
just so forewarning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm aware of that. But I think they're pretty open about it too. I mean, there are a bunch of posts when they were starting where it's clear that psychedelics were very important for the formation of the company. Would you agree? Would you disagree?
Yeah, it's always been a theme, not a public theme, however, but if you look at the language that Meow uses to talk about the experience in the exhibit, it is mind altering, mind blowing,
Yes, yes. Yeah. And you don't
Um,
need psychedelics to go in there and have your mind blown. Like
yeah,
it's a
exactly. It's
psychedelic experience without
a
the
legal way
psychedelic.
to have your mind blown.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
yeah, and Burning Man. What is the first time you heard of Burning Man? Were you ever interested in going?
no, I've actually never been interested in going because the idea of going out to a desert and running around naked or half dressed, drunk or stoned or whatever, just
Yeah.
didn't appeal to me.
It
Um,
never interested. It never interested me either. I think we probably got that from you genetically. Yeah.
the I did go, I wanted to go to Woodstock, so that's my age, and it was the one time I actually had an all-out argument with your grandfather, uh, where I talked back to him because he
Oh.
intimidated me, and I generally speaking, didn't argue with him. But I said, I really want to go to Woodstock. Look, my generation is going to Woodstock. And so he said, no way, I won't allow you to do that. And I think I was like 16, so he could say that. Um,
Yeah.
And instead, I I decided to go to a different thing, and there was some kind of music festival in Atlantic City, I think like 6 months later or something like that. I never actually went, but I I decided I would go without asking for permission, but I never went. And Woodstock, I think, has some relevance to Burning Man,
Yes, yes,
in the
yes.
sense that Woodstock was this incredible experience, even though it was full of mud and people were half naked, but the music was amazing, and it's become iconic. And I think Burning Man was started with and I don't think this was explicit, but with a sense that you wanted to create a regular Woodstock.
That is a very interesting question. I'm actually going to go out on Twitter and ask what is the relationship between Woodstock and
Burning Man.
Burning Man. But I'm sure some of your friends, some of your colleagues started going to
Yeah.
Burning Man in the
Yeah,
2000s.
I hear all about it all the time. Yeah, and then
Uh,
there's the rich people that started going. They'd rent a fancy RV or they'd get flown in. And I mean, the original Burning Man, the uh, what is it, ethic, really that violated the whole thing. You weren't
yes,
supposed to go and have a luxe experience.
yeah,
Um, and but some people started doing that. For instance, we tried to rent a Airstream here so we could experience what an Airstream was. And we went out, and it's like June or July. They're all rented. They're gone.
yeah.
You can't get an Airstream for like 3 months before Burning Man.
For
So
the
even
whole
here,
West.
in, even here in New
Yeah,
Mexico, right? They,
yeah,
they suck all the Airstreams and RVs out of the whole West.
yeah. It's totally crazy. It's really interesting. I'm really interested in as a cultural phenomena. I have
Yeah.
almost zero interest to go there. I'm sure I will eventually go there because my interest in the cultural phenomena is so interesting.
I think it might be fading, so I don't know, but and maybe that's just self-interest. But there's a bunch of other things like South by Southwest or Austin City Limits. There are other cultural phenomena, or Coachella. There's another one.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there is this thematic stuff going on in our society of people searching for experiences. Um, and Burning Man's kind of the ultimate because it's multi-day, and they make the sculptures and all that kind of stuff. The So Coachella's just music, right? Probably Woodstock has more to do with Coachella than it does with Burning Man. But so there are all of you have to keep your eyes wide open and see all the stuff that's going on,
yeah.
both
This
locally and regionally.
this relates to what we did last week when we went to Cerebral Valley, the AI conference. Right after that, the next day, I had a interview with someone who's in the AI world as well, and I asked them whether they had thought about it or heard about it, and they were like, "No, no, I don't go to the bigger conferences. I only go to the smaller ones." It's just such an. I'll explain what my understanding of a conference is and why you do it, and then you feel free to correct me. Basically, there's this wanting to connect with people in a scene, and then some instigator realizes there's a scene and then creates a sort of probably like a meetup or some sort of smaller thing, and then there's attraction to it, so it creates some larger thing out of that smaller thing, all sort of centered around the scene. What I've noticed in the past like 10-20 years, except for Burning Man, is that the lifetime value of these things is much quicker. It's much faster. Like it loses its steam. Is that accurate?
Sometimes, but to just compare that to TED,
Sure. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
uh, originally TED stood for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. It might have been education, but there was a reason it was called TED. And the first 15 plus years was run by one guy, a guy named Ricky Saul Werman. And it was a very small, not necessarily exclusive, but it was small because it was remote. Um, and then this guy, Chris, can't remember his last name, um, bought TED from Ricky Saul Werman and turned it into what it is now, which is like thousands of people show up, maybe 3,000 people show up,
Mm.
and they pay $17,000 to $20,000 a head. So it's this huge thing.
Was it always that price? Was it always that
Oh
price?
no,
Did
it
they
used
start?
to
Yeah.
be used to be 1,500 to two thousand
Okay.
dollars.
But it was a somewhat expensive event,
Yeah, it was
basically.
relatively expensive, but and so it was for people that could get their companies to pay for it.
Yeah.
and the key
Yeah.
thing. Uh,
Yeah.
I went to TED probably 5 or 6 years in a row when I was in Monterey, run by Ricky Saul Warman. I've never been since, but it
Yeah.
has turned into a business, right? They publish the videos, and they have a website, and it's a media business now. And that's what this new guy did, was turned it from this odd little conference into a media business, which
So,
credit for.
so um, I'm going to say something might be you might not agree with this. It's basically I think that TED is sort of left coded, not in the sense that they explicitly talk about political ideas, but in the sense that science and technology and art are more left coded thing. That's where you're going to find more people on the left. I've noticed we've talked about this shift several times before, which is that the grounds are shifting. There's new things coming up. There's new alliances. There's new friends. There's new enemies. All these types of things. And so I'm wondering.
Oops. Oops. Lost you.
So TED is sort of left coded, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is doing really interesting stuff that I can't quite figure out, not at all in technology, and on this whole other spectrum, which is kind of going back to the original ideas of the Republic. He thinks that there's a major change that happened in 1910s and 1920s in the United States, and is kind of advocating for a return to that American Republic that existed at that time. And so he's been doing this for quite a long time, and he is a sort of fringe character. But now with Trump being elected, all of the people in his circle are all getting invited to Mar-a-Lago or whatever. And so I'm not saying not thinking that that is the conference, but I'm thinking, because I do think that I am now probably on the more conservative end, although I think they're shifting. And I actually just had a great interview with somebody who's on the left, but who is more attuned to the new thing that's coming on the left. But in terms of that right coded type of thing, I think there might be an AI conference that could be started, that is sort of counterpositioned against some of the conferences in San Francisco, because of that comment that we both make fun of, which is there's one guy who said, like, there's only 150 people in AI who know what's going on, and they're all in San Francisco. And I think that it's total bull. And I think that now Silicon Valley, the spirit of Silicon Valley, has spread everywhere. And while it might be important in order to establish relationships in San Francisco, you don't need to be there anymore. It's said a lot. What do you think of all that?
So yeah, you did say a lot and covered sort of different things. Uh, if you're in AI, you do need to be in San Francisco, or you need to have a lot of money, which is in San Francisco.
Current AI, but they were talking at the conference how they're starting to hit scaling.
Yeah, no, let me
Yeah.
finish.
Yep.
So yeah, if you want to be an AI in that way,
Yeah,
you have to be in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But AI is going to affect everything. I was having a conversation recently, about, as humanity, we're going to be affected by AI, and I'm struggling with this, but so you don't need to be in San Francisco to be human. Maybe that's the thing I'm trying to say. Right? So
Yeah.
if you're an engineer and you want to, write code for LLMs and stuff like that, probably do need to be in San Francisco. But if you're in San Francisco, you don't have a worldview that's very human.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so we all need to understand what being human means. I think that's where I am, but that's not everything you said. So
That's a very good intro, is being human. It is actually exactly what I've been thinking, is that there's the humanism, and humanism is not represented in San Francisco. I would say San Francisco has become divergent from human values.
there you go.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Daniel Lurie will bring it back, the new mayor of San Francisco, but he was elected because nobody wanted the other ones. And, so it's not totally clear. He could be a surprise, though,
Yeah, you could be
because
surprised.
he's rich dude. He seems to be human. And maybe he'll start San Francisco back towards where it could be. But here's the interesting thought, which is at some level, Trump and his minions are more human. They're
Yeah,
dealing with stuff that matters to the people in the country, as opposed to, now the Democrats are accused of being elites and out of touch.
yeah.
Uh, so when you say you're more conservative, you can take that point of view without having to say that Donald Trump is a nice human being.
Is the right one. Yeah, yeah. And this is and I'm less pessimistic that that he is going to do a horrible job. But I don't think that he is a savior. I think that I think a lot of people look at what's happening right now and and say, okay, he's gonna save us and bring us back to the 1960s. And I think that is a fundamentally very, very wrong position, that there is no going back, that that this sort of switch between left and right is not the way it's going to happen, because going back to the original thing we started about, media, there's no TV, there's no TV telling everybody what to think anymore.
There's no mass communications, what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, and there are these echo chambers. But I have the sense, so I'm really tuned in on this because I've read about and listened to stuff about it, but there is this notion that political orders change. And I think I've said this even on this conversation, not this one, but in previous ones, where I learned, I had this magic moment where I read a line in a book about how the editor of the New York Times was the chairman of the Republican National Convention in 1856, 5 years after the New York Times was started, when Republicans were the liberals. So you compare that to where we are now, or have been, and then what's happening with the MAGA movement. It feels like we're going through another radical transformation of what the parties stand for. That's in the U.S. Economy, but it's happening around the world, even with Milei in Argentina and certainly in France and Germany and the UK, that there is a reordering going on of the political order. And the new humanism might be, the solution is not the government, right? We have to bring it back to our individual selves. And it's weird. It's very uncomfortable going through a transition like this. But I firmly believe that that's what we're doing, but we cannot predict what happens after Trump.
Yeah.
New
humanism. I really like that. I think I'm going to start talking about that. New humanism. Yeah.
We've just invented a whole new political movement.
Yeah.
And we're giving it to Trump, which is weird.
Well, yeah, no, he is the sort of like the guy who rode a momentum in a similar way. Milei also rode this momentum of the populism, but I don't think we're going in the direction of populism is going to equal what populism has meant in the past. I think populism might lead to a fracturing, and that fracturing is probably going to look something pretty different from the 1960s to 1990s, but that's our frame of reference. Going back to the psychedelics, it's like that's what we know, so that's what we think is going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, you have to elevate and look at how it's happened in the past. I mean, how the hell did World War II happen, right?
Yeah.
How do you trace that this weird dude in Germany, created a whole cult and gathered enough power that he instigated a world war across the world, right? And that was a pretty stunning thing. Millions of people died in concentration camps, and people. It was just, there was no ethical.
It was insane. That was the early version of what of the tail end of what we're experiencing, which is the lack of humanism.
Yeah.
With this new technology that was allowed to kill so many people.
Yeah. That. So you said tail end. I'm not sure it is the tail end. I think it's just the beginning.
in terms of tech, well, yeah, this goes into interesting territory. Some might say anxiety-provoking territory of what the technology is capable of doing. Warfare is changing. This is a great conversation, maybe for the last 10 minutes or so, about drones. So drones are in some way removing the human from war. Is that accurate?
Well, it's not just drones. The idea of autonomy. I don't know if you can do that, but autonomous
Weapons.
well, weapons or vehicles or whatever you're talking about. The fact that machines can act on their own, which we've not gotten to yet, thank God. There's still humans directing these things, but you can imagine taking soldiers out of it. So the issue is not how many people can you kill to win, although Israel is certainly trying to do that right now, and Russia is as well.
Yeah.
We're still in that old style of war, but there is this, if you have some imagination, you can imagine wars being fought without soldiers, without human beings. So, but still controlled by humans, and you can't play.
Sorry,
the Terminator. No, the
yeah.
Terminator vision is we're talking over each other. I'll start up.
The civilians. What I am curious about, and I'm hopeful that it won't happen, which is that I'm under the impression that in World War II, the bombers bombed civilian populations as a part of morale, so that if they could destroy the factories, if they could destroy the will of the people, then the leaders of those countries would have no choice but to stop fighting. And I'm worried that the lack of soldiers will actually make it more likely that civilian populations will be targeted, and not only from autonomous weapons, but also biological weapons, which is a crazy rabbit hole.
Are you familiar with the concept of mutually assured destruction?
I am, and actually at Cerebral Valley last Wednesday, they were talking about mutual assured destruction versus information asymmetry as the new paradigms, basically. But what were you going to say?
I'm just going to say that we had no war between 1952 and it's hard to say the Vietnam War was a war, but we had no world. We've not had World War since World War II because we're really worried that we'll wipe ourselves out.
Yep. And that for biological weapons is probably, hopefully, intact. And then there's biological weapons, there's autonomous weapons, but there's also I did an interesting interview with Nathan Mintz from CX2, I believe is the name of his company. And he's doing something wild, which is, so if autonomous vehicles are true, then we need to own the electromagnetic frequency spectrum. And that completely deny the enemy the ability to use their autonomous systems and also prevent our systems from being targeted by their systems, which represents a whole other kind of angle into this conversation too.
Wow, CX2. So I guess he's moved on from Spartan.
Yep. Yeah, I think there was I think they got sold, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Doesn't say, but so he's a founding CEO of both. Yeah. Anyway, not to be distracted by that. So while we're on the precipice of either, and you can see people struggling between the two of Utopia versus
yes, exactly.
Action.
Yeah. What if it's not either? That's my question.
Almost certainly will not be either.
Yeah. That feels like a good place to wrap up. Well, thank you so much and see you next week.
Yep. See you next week. Thank you.